Okay, so React Native, Expo production API troubleshooting. So what I mean by that is my journey through API troubleshooting. It's not a how-to, but hopefully everyone gets a little bit insight on Expo in general and just stuff that goes on in React Native. Okay. All right, so React Native, it's a framework for Android and iOS. Great for rapid prototyping. You do not need to know Swift and Android, Kotlin, or something like that. It's just JavaScript, pretty much, until you have to do native stuff. But we're not going to be focusing on native stuff today, for the most part. It's lean and fast, so that means it's not a large bundle size. They try to like remove components that are not necessary. So, for example, right now they don't have WebView included in the React Native core bundle because not a lot of people use it. And they slowly are taking out those things. Hot reloading and live reloading. So that's a React thing. Basically, it allows you to just reload the app when code changes. Most of the time it works. Expo, it works pretty much 100% of the time, unless it's asset related, like you add a new image or video or something like that. Then you will need to clear the cache and restart your hosting. So what is Expo? Expo is basically exactly what React Native doesn't do. It has a huge package. It includes camera components, video components, literally everything you need to build an application from start to finish without ejecting out of the Expo kit. So basically no native module bridging, no Android coding. You do not have to open up the Xcode simulator stuff and debug stuff at that level. It's just super nice, and the CLI is beautiful. Now, it was not as beautiful a year ago. There's a lot of issues, but it is much better now. Right here, I don't know if you can see the mouse. This is a snack. So that's something that is used throughout React Native demos on the web. So people can just open these snacks up, which are Expo hosted apps on like S3, I believe. And you can just download it and see it on the web, which is quite nice. It works until you use like native components such as the camera. That cannot be demoed on a simulator or the snacks as of now. I could be wrong, but I have not found that to be working yet. Let's see. It has clear documentation. Pretty much they include everything in their docs. Everything, it doesn't mean it all works perfectly. You have to figure out those little nuances and how to do those things. But their documentation is quite nice. And actually, I believe it supports iOS 10 now. So I'm not sure if 9 is supported anymore. So something to look at if you need supporting of 9. Publishing. So that is basically where you have your code. It maybe already exists on test flight, and you just change maybe a JS thing related to React Native. And you don't want to build the whole app again because that's a pain in the butt. Or it takes like 2 days, or it really depends on like your user base. If you're doing like public testing, it takes like 3 days for iOS to verify that bundle and approve it. So what this allows you to do is just immediately publish that code to that app that everyone's installed already. So it makes development and QA quite nice until you add native components, and then you can't publish. You have to build the whole bundle again. Okay, so some essential APIs: camera, video, asset, maps, preloading, and caching, and Expo publish and fastlane. That's what I just talked about. So camera, basically, is just React Native camera, and they just include it in their bundle. So you don't have to do any of the linking, any of the native-related connection to that camera app, which is quite nice. Same thing with video. Asset is quite nice because it allows you to do a lot of preloading of those assets. You can grab URIs. You can do all sorts of stuff with like images. You can download stuff from S3, cache it, and then load the app. So there's all sorts of cool little stuff with that. Maps goes without saying. You just open up the Google Maps and it works. It works to the level that whatever is native on your device, it allows. Like if you are on an iPhone, I believe it only opens up the Apple Maps, not the Google Maps. So if you want Google Maps, you will have to eject out of the package. So what happens when it breaks? Sure. Very good question. So publishing, you can do both. So right now, the way I have it set up is I have a test flight app, which is the iOS testing area. And that app, when I publish, it will reload everything. And then on top of that, we also have a Expo hosted app that's private repo. And that will also change. So if you do not have the app currently downloaded, you can just download Expo's little app and you can be logged into the account and then you can see it immediately, or you could just use a QR code and be able to access that app. But it depends.
The QR code and at least on iOS. Because of some security issue that I had with Apple, you couldn't do, at least at some point when I tried, you couldn't do in iOS using the QR code.
So it's a little bit different through Android. You can click a button. Yeah. And iOS, you have to open up the camera and then scan it as a QR code, and then it will open up the Expo app. At least from what I've experienced, I haven't had it break yet, but what version were you on? Like iOS version? Okay. Yeah, unless it's public. If it's a public app, then you can. But if it's private, then you either have to let people log into that app, which means you're the owner, and then they can use the QR code. Jason? Yeah, because iOS is more locked down. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the thing with publishing. You basically are hot reloading the entire app. So basically, when the user closes out the currently downloaded app, if they have it on their device directly, not through the Expo app, it will immediately check. If you have this enabled, it's actually configured now. It used to always do it, and now you can disable it. Basically, it checks to see if there's new JS stuff up there, and then it pulls it down, and then your whole app's updated. And yeah, so the issue with that is users do not know that their app updated. Yes, and also bad for QA. Because QA does not know what they're on. So you have some sort of component that you display the version on it, and like your hotfix version. That's what I do. And I'm like, oh, hotfix number 6 is out, and please QA that and make sure that you have that code. I also have a way to just directly hot reload in the app. So even if you had the app open, all those features are shipped directly with Expo. So you don't have to worry about doing any native integration. Any other questions related to that? It's still free. I don't know if there is a pricing tier. Yeah, because it's S3 and yeah.
So if you have your own app, and if you have your own app,
and a new user downloads it, and there is a hotfix out, that hotfix will not run, right, until
you close out the app,
Yeah.
like quit the instance.
so. Okay, that's a huge limitation in my view, because
There might be a way to have your app. So here's my solution. You'd have a WebSocket that just checks for hotfixes,
Mhm.
and then if there is a hotfix, it would just force the reload. Because you can actually force the reload directly in the Expo app, so you could have
But-
something that's watching for it.
that doesn't sound like a good user experience on the
No,
first
that would
run.
totally suck having your whole app reloaded right in front of
I
your
have the
face.
same problem with code push,
Yeah.
that pretty much 80% of my changes, I can't really use code push because they affect first run.
Yeah.
Okay,
And if
so
it-
it's not any different.
Also, yeah, you got to watch out for hotfixes. If it's native related and you do that hotfix, you are going to break the app for everyone, because you're requiring a component that exists on your app, and then you basically are saying new JS go up to the app, and that new JS is requiring a component that does not exist, has never been created before, and this is why if you're ejected or you have some sort of asset that was added in or something like that, it can break. Though they are working on making that much more streamlined. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Side note, is there like a separate store or rating system? Because I understand, like, okay, so websites, right?
Mhm.
They have a web, like a rating system. It's because they're being kind to you. Apps inherently have a rating system. Does Expo's store have a different rating system? Maybe you can game the system.
It
little
has
bit
like
by
a
using Expo.
it has
I'm
like
curious.
a likes thing, I think, to it.
I don't remember.
I don't use it that much because
Okay.
I have a private app, but
Okay.
yeah,
Interesting.
there's a way to do it, but
Okay.
I don't know what the use case would be
Fair
for
enough.
it. But
I
yeah.
just thought I'd ask.
Okay, so what if your code breaks and you don't know why it's breaking? What are your options? First off, you should have unit tests. You should know that your functions do what your functions should be doing. They take the right inputs, and they give you the right outputs. You can make a UI debugging component. This is like a last resort, or if you're in development mode and you just want to do a few things that actually use native features, or you want to make sure that it actually works on the device. Example, we have like a file uploading thing, and we have a debugger component. You hit the upload, it does asynchronous and synchronous uploads, and we just see if it breaks. And it's a great way to see if the app can connect to the API without just being on your development environment. So this is all installed users can use this because you're shipping those assets that are part of the test. You would take that out in the actual released user production. TypeScript, fully supported. So it is nice in Expo. Yeah, I'm an avid user of TypeScript because it has saved me so much time in terms of getting undefined JavaScript values and not being able to debug that, or at least taking 5 hours to debug it. And that compounds really fast when you have another bug next day. So TypeScript, very important. Redux, if you are just starting out as a developer, you might just build a bunch of React components that pass data down and all the way up. Redux is going to solve that solve that issue by having a centralized store, and you basically do not need to do that. And you can do a lot of stuff with data and async stuff, especially like API calls. I have a bunch of Redux actions that do camera-related stuff that make everything a lot more simple. But yeah, Redux is nice.
When would you use the React Context API versus Redux?
I have not gone into context, so I can't give you that answer. But yeah, I'm looking into it. Unmounting and asynchronous processes. Okay, so this is a major thing with React Native as a whole. Basically, all of your components that are asynchronous are going to have issues when working together. So you need to have controllers out there. You might have a navigation component like Stack Navigator, which is a standard thing we use throughout React Native, and that would take you to another screen. And that other screen might require that camera component. That camera component mounts, and then you go back to another screen, and it has another camera component. Those two camera components cannot exist in tandem. So basically, you're gonna end up with your UI freezing, a crash, or some sort of weird way your data is going to fire. So like if you're recording while you unmount, you can end up with some serious UI lag and issues with your application. So you absolutely should be using Redux or context, I guess, if you figure out how to use it just like Redux or better. And doing those asynchronous processes, like unmount the camera, you quit all your asynchronous actions first, and then you navigate back. So basically, you just got to be aware of that. Otherwise, you will have those issues with your application.
Or is it just React Native?
It's React Native.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a limitation that's not always that well documented, but because you're going into, like, let's say you're going to use React Navigation. You go into React Navigation, they say X, Y, and Z, and you're reading the documentation for there. They don't say how to use it with React Native Camera or something like that, but you just need to be aware of that as a whole. If you're mounting these kind of components that cannot exist with other ones in terms of screens, first off, you should not be doing that. You should just have the camera exist as a root component, and you mount it when you need to mount it or unmount it when you don't need it. But if you were to do it in a screen, you need to unmount that camera component if you're going to mount it in another screen.
Is React Native navigation better at handling this, or?
No, so React Native navigation is not built to do that kind of stuff. It's built to do navigation, and that's it. So you need to control things before you hit that navigation.
Have you compared that to the Wix navigation?
I have not
I
used
only
that.
recently started exploring Wix navigation. I was curious if you had any insight on that.
I don't, because I've only used React Navigation and specifically Stack Navigator. That has a lot of issues with the camera stuff, but the animations are nice, and that's why I use it. Yeah, so they are changing that soon, though. So can't wait for that. Published versus development, production, on-device differences. So let's see. I have a camera component that works perfectly fine in my development environment. And then when it's built or when it's code pushed, it breaks. And very hard to debug something like that. So I ended up having to eject out, and I'm going to use the Wix camera just to see if there's a difference or issue with the camera component. But I've literally tried everything, I think, with promises and the async camera recording. So it's I've reached the point where I had to eject from the app and debug that way, which is actually quite nice now. It doesn't break like it did 6 months ago. So ejecting will basically turn Expo into Expo Kit. You do not need to change any of your JS requirements of Expo. So your imports, you don't have to change any of that. And Expo is going to create a iOS and Android related file system. It will require all the dependencies that are needed, and then you can basically install any native component on top of that. And you can still use the JS code push. But if you change any of the native components, you absolutely need to bump the version up and build again. So it's, yeah.
That's not our experience. We are not good at ejecting export. If you have certain components that they have used, they have not, as far as our team's experience goes, they are working towards it, but not all components of the export are ejectable yet.
Oh, you're saying that some Expo components
You
will
can't
not
eject
be
them
able
out.
to.
No, we tried, we spent a bunch of time, we said, okay.
Which
we'll live
ones
with it.
do you know of? I would love to
I
know.
don't know the list with me. My teammate, she was supposed to come here, she had the details, but
Okay.
We know for sure we couldn't do it.
Okay.
We spent bunch
Whichever
of
ones,
time.
whichever ones you find, let us know because I actually want to like
Actually, one of our developers
be able to be
got
aware
in
of
touch
that.
with the developers of the Expo. They said, these you can, these you are in beta mode right now. You can't do it. There are a lot of workarounds. You have to live with it if you want to do it.
Yeah.
That's what they said. But in the next 3 to 6 months, they said you should be able to eject all the components, but not everything is done yet. Is
Wow.
what? No, this is not documented. This is. Yeah, it's a private conversation one of our teammates had with the Expo developers. They said,
Wow. Yeah.
our goal is to go there, but we're not there yet. With all the no, because it's tough. If you think about the programmers are not good documenters. So let's not even argue there. Yeah.
There's a forum you can go on the Expo Slack forum and ask questions. Any other questions? I'll just keep going. Okay, so things I run into, probably talked about a few of them, but the React Native cache, this is a simple thing. Basically, sometimes you need to clear the cache. If you add new assets in, your app is not going to compile. You need to clear the cache, reset everything, have your assets compile, app works. It's Expo, it does a lot of that stuff for you, but some things it's limited to still. Assets flashing white before loading. So that's an issue related to not having your assets like directly in images or like, I forget what the Android folder is, but basically Expo solves that with assets and preloading and caching. So what I do at the beginning of my application is I have a preloader and cacher of all the assets. So when I load that component, the asset is already loaded in memory, and there's no latency or that white flash, which is really annoying from a user experience. Issues with that are if your asset memory if your asset's too large and you're preloading too much memory, and then your app could crash. So preload what you need, and then maybe you're on another screen and you know that you need components from the next screen to get to the next screen over, preload then, and just be smart about it, basically.
Regarding the white flash, I've noticed that I've specified like a default image source, and that seems to have gotten rid of that. I was just wondering your experience.
Right, yeah, you could do that. You could have a preloaded image that maybe is like a gray or a really small file, and then you could just use that as your backup and then replace it with the loaded asset. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to get around it, but if you just want to see that asset immediately, which honestly most users probably do, yeah, that's something that's important. Let's see. Native component async unmounts and UI freezing. So again, that's related to like Stack Navigator, where you're going from one screen to another screen to another screen, and then you go back and you're unmounting something and you're trying to mount something while that component's still not fully unmounted, or it has asynchronous processes going on. Your UI will completely freeze. You will not be able to click things, and then it will lag through, and then your whole app will like get really weird with navigation and stuff like that. So something to be aware of when you're developing. It's not an issue that will be going away. It's just an issue that needs to be taken care of quickly. Let's see. iOS and Android UI touchable interfaces. Okay, so these bugs, they're not really bugs, but it's just a different way of doing things for iOS and Android. Android, basically, if you have a position absolute for anything, the layer below it is always going to overlap it. Even if you can see that icon, you cannot touch it. You cannot activate any of the events from it. So basically, all your touchable UI interfaces that overlay over components, they need to be at the bottom of wherever you're calling those. Yeah, like think of it as like you have a navigation menu that is always going to exist in an absolute position on the top left or right of your screen, depending on. Well, I mean, this issue does exist, though, even if you don't do something like that. But well, so the issue is it's z-index related. So like z-index for iOS will solve everything. Android, z-index doesn't do anything for. Instead, they have a it's like a elevation. It's called elevation. It will raise the element above another element, but still, if it's a touchable interface, you cannot click on it. So it has to exist below wherever you're calling. Anyways, this is a bug that I've dealt with. I've been doing a lot of absolute positioning for one of my UI apps, and it's very annoying. Oh yeah, yeah. So I was like, oh, I don't want other people to suffer from this. Promises not working properly. This is an issue with my camera app, actually. Basically, I have an async recording thing that does not work. The API is slightly broken, like max duration does not work. But basically, it will work sometimes, and then it will break sometimes. So this is Expo related. In general, React Native promises work fine. There's no issues, like edge case here I'm talking about. But you can also use other solutions like Bluebird, which has cancelable promises, and yeah, nice. Let's see. All right, my current struggles. Just wanted to get more insight. I basically, so this is kind of ugly code right here, but I've gone through many iterations. I used async await. It was beautiful code. And in the end, I got to this level, and it still is breaking. I have a cancelable promise, so if you did ever unmount the component, you would not be doing anything with state. But yeah, basically, max duration does not call the stop recording, and async record calls for like 1 or 2 times, and then it breaks for my current app. So caches for catch. Yes, I have iterated through that, I think, in one of my beautiful code instances. But yeah, I should probably do that and then add like a JS logger, like Sentry, and then be able to see what exactly the error is. But I know what the error is because I've dealt with this. It basically does not see some of the constants. It doesn't see some of, like, it doesn't call the stop recording. On the first time you call it, there's an issue, and I'm pretty sure it's the camera component right now. But that's been 2 weeks of debugging, and anyways. So without getting into the details I can't get into, it's basically an application that records certain things and also can like stream video and then uploads it to an S3 server. And then you do something with, no. But anyways, it does stuff with that, and then you basically get a response back. So basically, we're not getting the file, and therefore there's no upload, so just infinite loading screen. And it happens infrequently. Like, I will run the app, and it will work twice in a row, and then the third time, it never actually records. You don't see the switch between the camera preview and the camera record, and it works perfectly on develop 100% of the time.
Are these asynchronous functions?
This is the async record on the camera.
Async seems to have challenges of that nature because the time in which it fires, it may be related to that.
It might actually be related to the cache and how that's working. Maybe it's not properly unloading the cache, and like with camera, and there's breakage. I don't know. but anyways, that's why I ejected. And I probably will go back once this API is fixed, but I would love to fix it. Anyways, about me, LinkedIn, Twitter, and GitHub. Please add me if you want to. And I'd love to collaborate on stuff. Thank you. All right, questions?
So now that you've done Expo and ejected Expo, do you see any huge advantages of, I can see Expo as a good at, like starting up, like just, you have some ideas and concepts and you just want to get a working app that you can play with, tell some, some friends to try it out quickly, give you feedback initially. But once you're through the initial phases and you're kind of getting, in the production mode, do you still see advantages of sticking with Expo or just, biting the bullet, ejecting, take full control? Because I've found I've done more of the non-Expo kind of development where I can see, okay, you know what, let me upgrade to the latest React Native because these are the issues that it fixes. Whereas being tied to Expo, it's just one other layer. So from your experience, what do you see? Do you feel like the need to go back to Expo in more like production cases? Yeah.
So from developing on Expo for a year now, and then like it was like 2 days ago I ejected out, and it finally worked. It was not working 6 months ago when I tried it for some other issue. It was related to the camera again. But basically, with what I'm using Expo currently for, which is code push, it's all linked together now. So once this application's up there and you want to do some native features or like, I don't know what you want to do in production level, but I would highly recommend just ejecting out actually right now and building it yourself. Yeah, my bundle size, which, I mean, this could be my fault here. It was at 100 megs. Yeah. So the .ipa, when it was compiled together, the iOS, it was 100 megs. And then when I compiled it from Xcode, it is only 18. So, I mean, that's a huge difference. Like that's buried entry for many users. So, I mean, this is probably my fault. There might have been some config that I messed up on, and I didn't enable compression or something like that of the assets. But I've heard stories that these bundle sizes can be larger. So, yeah, it's something to be aware of. Expo is going to be heavier than just having a regular React Native. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Is your app out in production and used, or
It's
is it?
It's in a test environment right now. Basically, we're just collecting user data and in a like a closed circle kind of testing environment. And that's all we need it for right now. We're not planning to take it to the next level for a little while until we get funding for it, but yeah.
So this is just an experiment?
Yes, it's a trial run, and then we're looking for VC funding. But I mean, that's not my job. I'm the developer. I'm not directly invested in the project.
Would you recommend using React Native then for the production app or to go on the market?
From my experience, yeah, like it works pretty well. It's not as fast as the native environments, but it is much easier to develop for, less overhead. A lot more developers out there understand React, so they can understand the component life cycle better. And then you have to pick up that native coding experience, especially when you're doing custom modules, but it's much easier to develop for. So that's why I would recommend it. But if you want something that completely is not supported by React Native, it does not have community packages, and you want to build it all yourself from scratch, you probably should not be choosing React Native, just because that's a lot of work.
Hey, I have a question about how you find it is to use React Native versus React, and in terms of reliability and stuff like that.
Okay, so as a developer, I actually started the opposite way. I started on React Native to learn React at the same time. So my code base really, it was terrible for React for a couple months, and then I figured it out. But the difference is with React Native, there's a lot of overhead with just breakage and troubleshooting of these modules. So you're adding another layer onto your React development. So if you change stuff and it's a native related issue that breaks, or someone bumps up the version and you forget to clear the cache, or there's some stupid little fix out there, you have to enable some feature on iOS or Android, you have to do all that research yourself. You have to figure it out yourself if you're on that latest version. And it takes away from that development time. Like, just as a React developer, you could just be building React components. And as a React Native developer, you have to be building those components and also be aware of your limitations with your platforms. So there's definitely overhead. But yeah, as long as you're aware of that overhead, you'll be fine.
More of a comment for the earlier question that was asked, which was, would you recommend React Native for native development? Having built React Native apps and in production mode, the only thing I would add to that is now React Native has evolved significantly from 2-3 years when it started off. So the question in my mind now is, if the mobile app, the question to ask is, first look at React Native and see, can you achieve what you want to achieve? And if you can, React Native gives you significant acceleration in terms of multi-platform development and just the development process. I have found the cost-wise, if you're costing out projects and stuff like that, initially there is still a significant, learning curve. So some people are like, oh, React Native is a silver bullet and it'll solve, half the cost, and that's not the case. So it's a bit of a surprise for like project managers and people. 2 team versus 1, but it's more at later end where you start seeing the benefits, because you can quickly push out updates and you have a single team that could span across front end and back end. So, but initially you don't see as much. So the question to ask is, can you achieve what you want to achieve using React Native? And if you get the answer no, then choose. So the default, I think, has shifted from, doing the native app, just pure native iOS, Android first, versus attempt with React Native.
So I would also comment on that too. If you are trying to use a leading edge, like cutting edge module out there, like last year, it was like early April, May or something in that time frame. Google released MLKit, which is the machine learning kit. You could put in TensorFlow models. I looked at it and I looked at iOS and then I looked at Android and I was like, okay, cool. And then I was like looking at React Native and I was like, is there any support for it? No, there's no support for it at that time. And I was like, I could build this native module, but I don't really have that experience at the time. I did not. I was using Expo purely. And I just said, okay, I'm going to do it in Swift, because there's documentation, there's projects out there. Yeah, so it really depends on the use case of what you need it for.
With the backend, being with machine learning, you tend to be a back end, not front end. So you can still hit like a endpoint that gives you like a JSON response or something like that, right? No?
Depends on the machine learning. So what we were doing is image recognition, machine learning. So you train a model. This is all back-end stuff you do. And then that model is downloaded through Firebase, the Fireserver, and it runs on your camera, and you're just using the iOS device processor to do all that image processing, and it's a lot faster, and it's a lot more cost efficient. Actually, I'm going to take back, it's a lot faster. It's just cost efficient. You don't have to worry about doing all the processing on a server side. Yeah, so.
So did you figure out your camera problems? I mean, does it work now?
No.
Which is connected to my earlier question. Would you recommend taking it to production? Because
My current app right now?
So right now,
No.
I'm hearing, yes, I would recommend it, but I couldn't fix it.
No, I would not recommend what I'm dealing with right now as we could not push that to production. You cannot have a.
No, I mean, okay. But I mean, do you think you can fix it?
Yes, I do. I think that it's related to one of the React Native modules. Expo uses the React Native camera module, and I'm going to directly install that module and go through that code and not use Expo's wrapper of it and see if I can troubleshoot the issue. So that's actually what I'm doing tonight. So that will be fun. And then if that fails, I will try the Wix API, which is very similar. It just requires a more in-depth integration. It's less of a React Native link project instantly installs, or CocoaPods, you add like a couple lines. This one you have to do manually. So that adds time and debugging. But yeah, I would not recommend pushing this code up to 1,000 users or however many users we're going to target. But that's not on our plan anyways right now.
Good talk. Thanks.
So even if React Native Camera doesn't work, you could experiment with
Wix.
right, or React Native. I think like again, that's the problem with React Native. There's so many components out there. You have to sort of experiment. Well, there's React Native Camera, but there's React Native image crop pricker, which has camera built into it. What's that?
I think that project is too fun.
Yeah, that's
That's the thing. I mean,
right.
if you look at all, oh, great.
Yeah.
It's like a
That's
buffet
right.
and, oh, it's expired.
Yeah.
And
So that's another
That's a
thing.
challenge. That's a challenge with React Native. Absolutely.
just eliminate everything that is required.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the other issue. You end up, whatever you need for that React Native app, you end up having to support that module as a developer. So you have to learn that code base sometimes. So that adds overhead onto your app versus paying for an Android developer, iOS developer that knows both of those things and those components and all that stuff like that. They don't have to worry about other people's repos, other people's code bases, because they're building it up from scratch. I'm not an Android developer, and I'm mostly not an iOS developer, but I would think that once you are at that level and you know that code base, it would be a lot more efficient to come from that approach.
Yeah, and that's been a challenge with React Native. There's so many components out there that someone built it for themselves, and they, it's awesome that they put it out in the open source, but it's not maintained. And so I think to address this problem, they've created a React Native community. Is exactly a collection of sort of well-maintained, curated components. I think React Native Web, which was taken out of the core, and Jamin and others are working on, is part of React Native community. So yeah, right, exactly, that's right. Yeah.
Any other questions, guys? Thanks for coming out.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I'm the CEO of a local company. and we are looking for hiring developers with React Native background. If anybody's interested, please get in touch with me. I'm looking for React Native and also full stack with React. If you don't have React Native, if you have React and the backend Java, that's also okay. So we're looking for hiring local developers. Just let me know. I have my card here. Thank you, Bill.